Cold calling basics. This is brought to you from the Small Business Solver team. So why is cold calling so important? Basically, cold calling is the #1 way in terms of cost effectiveness to get new business. So in a B2B relationship, a B2G, so that's business to business or business to government relationship, cold calling is actually the most cost effective way to get new leads. So what we're going to be covering today is the top 10 tips that you need to be able to actually start cold calling more efficiently. So the very first thing is actually to be human. Be yourself. People buy from people they like. So as long as you're actually not reading a script and you're showing your personality and you're actually adding humor and you're only saying things that you're comfortable with, this is when you're going to be more relaxed, more confident, and more yourself. So really the top tip is to be human first and always. What does it mean? Again, never say things that you're uncomfortable with, so always say lines, phraseology, vocabulary that you're very comfortable with. And next, don't use a script. Basically, use talking points, understand in general the message you want to get across, but don't have verbatim script. Then use your personality. So if you like jokes, great. If you understand numbers, great. If you're someone who really loves listening, and getting other people's feedback, that's another great tactic. Whatever your skill set is, whatever your strength, use your personality and be yourself. And finally, if possible, when possible, have fun. I mean, I always look at my own customers as part of my partners. So they're actually my partners, not my customers. I'm always asking for feedback. I'm always trying to improve. So that's part of the fun, is you're actually building relationships with these people, and that's key. So be yourself so that you can start building that solid relationship with your customers. Tactic tip #2, do what you'd want done. So a lot of times when you're telemarketing, when you're cold calling, you are going to have these questions like, what should I say right now? Or maybe they ask you a question and you're thinking, how should I respond? Or you're wondering, is it time for me to call them back? Should I be following up? Is it too soon? Is it too late? All of these questions can be answered simply by thinking, what would you want done if you were the customer? So put yourself in your customer's shoes, and that's going to answer a lot of questions regarding how you should behave and how you should act. The next tip, be honest. Honesty first. Honesty is in fact the best policy. And great examples are that often in cold calling, we can be very far removed from where our customers are. Sometimes we're actually calling on behalf of other organizations. So if people are asking you questions like, are you calling me from another place? You should always be honest. And so again, honesty is truly the best policy. Next tip. How to keep your energy up. I mean, when you're on the phone, sometimes you might be locked in a room in an office or wherever you might be, and you actually have to portray a lot of emotion through the phone in order to build that first rapport with your client. So how do you keep your energy up? How do you not sound like you're bored or tired or depressed even? So how do you do it? Maybe standing up, maybe walking around the room. Eating chocolate, making sure you have coffee, even pop, or whatever it is that's going to get your adrenaline up. Maybe there's certain times in the day that you're actually going to be more on it. And then, of course, take breaks. Breaks are important. Make sure that you're not calling for less than an hour, because really, cold calling is all about getting into the groove. So it should be an hour plus that you're doing that. So it's a chunk of time. And make sure it's not over 4 hours, because at that point in time you're drained. I don't care how much coffee or chocolate you've had. And then finally, if you're feeling sick, just get better. You need that energy to run the rest of your business. So suck it up. Don't call. Your business shouldn't actually flounder because of one day of not calling. Now, the next one, respect your customer's time. In fact, a great best practice is to always ask if now is a good time to talk. It's respectful. It's how you'd want to be treated if a salesperson was calling you. And there's this huge added benefit is if they are busy and they tell you a better time to call them back, if you do call them back at that time, which you should be doing, all of a sudden, you've established credibility. You are someone who's going to do what they say they're going to do. If you promise, I'm going to call you back tomorrow at 4 p.m., and you do pick up the phone and call them back at 4 p.m. like they said that's when they're free, all of a sudden, you've been helpful, you've proved some credibility. So respecting their time, that's a best practice, and there's the side benefit of adding credibility to yourself. Next one, when to call. So just remember, again, who your customers are and think about them first. So when to call? Well, for most decision makers, there's a lot of team meetings at 10 a.m. and there's a lot of management meetings at 2 p.m. And that's pretty much across the board and not really industry specific. Marketing companies, marketing people typically start late, work late. Senior management typically starts early and works late. So really at the end of the day is when you can reach them. Just before lunch, people usually have 15 to 20 minutes just before lunch. All their morning meetings are over with, and they're actually just sitting at their desk, wrapping up emails. And you know what? Maybe having a distraction of a phone call, that's a good time to be calling. And then just a reminder that executives do work early and work late, but the key is you won't have a gatekeeper or receptionist to get you there. So you need to know their direct line or their extension number in order to reach them at these opportune hours. How often to call? The key here is to be persistent but not annoying, and that is definitely a fine balance. So if you actually reach someone in person, the key thing is ask them when to follow up. But if you're only getting voicemail, the key is to actually leave a maximum of 4 voicemails. The first voicemail, nobody ever responds to. Reason being, it's the first time I've heard of you. Why would I call you back? The second voicemail, people realize that you're actually a real person. This is a real opportunity. You're probably going to keep on calling them back. So they'll actually respond to the second, third, or fourth voicemails. But if you've already left 4 voicemails, you have to realize that they probably aren't interested. So the 5th voicemail is definitely not worth the return. And at that point in time, that's probably where the fine balance is becoming rather than persistent, it's becoming annoying. So max 4 voicemails, and then you can move on to another prospect. Lead list quality. Basically, having a better lead list increases your chance of success. Spending money and spending time making sure that your lead list is good is very important. The whole idea is that, let's say 50% of your leads aren't good on your lead list. That means that you're wasting half of your time, if not longer, because you're getting voicemails and things like that. So maybe your lead list simply isn't good. So here's a way to actually check. If you have 30 voicemails in a row, it's a bad lead list. If you have 20 people who can't afford what you're doing or really are not an ideal client, that's a bad lead list. So once you've actually reached out to everyone and you're not getting interest, that's a bad lead list. And you really need to take a second look. Continuing to hound a bad lead list is a huge waste of time. Lead list information. When you're actually reaching out to people, what you should be doing is always gathering information. And this becomes your intellectual property and actually helps you with future sales. Extension numbers, getting emails, these are pretty typical things to be asking, but you should also be finding out their dog's name, their kid's name, what sports they like. These are all ways to build common ground and find a place that you can start your relationship at. If you actually enter in that information, the next time you call back, you're already that much further ahead. This part actually helps you differentiate yourself. Another key thing that you could record is how to actually pronounce someone's name, especially if it's a unique name that you normally don't hear. Make sure that you spell it out phonetically in the notes so that you, next time you call them, say their name perfectly, correctly. They will remember that and they will appreciate that, and that's a great first step in the door. And finally, gatekeepers. Last big tip here is that not all gatekeepers are bad. In fact, there's 3 different types of gatekeepers, and they're pretty much split equally, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. So the first third are helpers. These gatekeepers have been at the organization for years. They know everyone. They probably know more about the organization than the CEO does. So when they ask you, okay, who are you looking for? What are you trying to do? It's these types of questions. Give them as much information as possible, because what they're trying to do is direct you to the right person. They're the helper. They're not trying to block you. The second one is actually trying to block you. They're the protector. They want to make sure that what your messages, what your company's doing is good enough to pass on. They don't want to pass you on and then you'd be a waste of time. So what you have to do is you actually have to pitch them. You have to explain why your product or service is genuinely going to help the person that they're going to forward you to. They're going to be brief with you. They're going to be asking lots of questions. They're going to sound rigid, and they're going to sound like they're not going to pass you on. Sometimes they won't, but your job is to actually convince them otherwise. Another tactic is, of course, finding direct lines at this point in time so you can bypass the protector. However, if you can actually frame your message and make sure that it's compelling, the protector will still forward you on. It's just it has to be very compelling. And finally, the cheerful. This person basically is a new employee or someone who's not overly engaged in the organization. They'll sound very, very cheerful on the phone, but they won't really know or understand what you're talking about, and they won't really know or understand where to send your phone call to. So what you have to do with these people is basically tell them what job description you normally talk to at other organizations. They, again, are not going to be blocking you. They just they simply don't know who to send you to. So again, giving them information, giving them direction, they'll get you to the right people. So gatekeepers falls into 3 1/3. So the first third, helpers, the second third, protectors, and the last third, cheerful. So in total, these are cold calling basics. Let's review backwards. We talked about the gatekeepers, who they are, how to overcome and help each of them move you forward. We talked about what type of information is going to be really critical for you. We talked about what a lead list that has high quality versus poor quality is going to do to your pipeline. We talked about how often to call, when to call, how to respect your prospect's time, how to keep your energy and optimism levels up, to stay honest, it truly is the best policy. Do what you'd want done, so really start putting yourself in your customer's shoes. And finally, be yourself. Above all, be human, don't sound like a robot. And those are the cold calling basics.